Hello, how are you doing? As much as I enjoy following book prizes and looking at best books of the year lists for suggestions of what I should try reading, and as great as some of these books are, and as much as they deserve to be celebrated, it feels like there are other books published every year that go under the radar. They might get some good reviews, but they don't achieve wider recognition, and so not many readers are aware of them. And some of these books deserve a wider readership. So I have picked out 6 books that have been published this year that I have read, which I think have excellent stories that are so well crafted and are really meaningful. And I've just not heard many or any people discussing these books in my own little corner of the internet. So I hope you might be inspired to pick up one or more of these books because I think there's something very special about them. So I'm going to go through them. First off, there is a novel called Night Journey by Greg Johnson. And this book is so thrilling in a lot of ways, but also really emotional, following the story of a family that experiences a tragedy and a loss of the husband and father of the family due to alcoholism and poor mental health. And so the mother and son are left kind of astray, and they encounter a very charismatic man who comes into their life and kind of takes charge, and things spiral out of control, and they go on this cross-country journey, which is very thrilling, and it revolves between their different perspectives. And so, yeah, there is this very tense story at the center of it, and it's so interesting how it goes back and forth between the different perspectives, and you get more details about what is occurring, but also the history and personalities of each of these really interesting characters. And also there's this larger meaning to the story about what do we do when we're at a very vulnerable period of our lives and we put our trust in other people but don't look for the warning signs that we should. And the way it follows this journey as things careen out of control is so well done. And yeah, I think this is a writer that deserves a lot more recognition because I've read a number of his books. Next is a great big novel that I got completely lost in reading this autumn that is so clever and really kept me on my toes as there were so many revelations and surprises in it. It's a historical story called Fayne by Anne-Marie MacDonald. It's set at the end of the 1800s on the border between England and Scotland at a remote estate, which is very grand, but which is surrounded by bogland and which is really out in the middle of nowhere. And it follows an adolescent child named Charlotte, who is very intelligent and very precocious and has a very mannered way of speaking because Charlotte's lived a very secluded life, not been allowed to leave the estate or interact with many other people except for people that work there, and just lives there with their father. And as we gradually learn Charlotte's story, and it's a coming of age tale, and it explores many issues to do with gender, but also like the restrictions of the time period, the limitations that women experienced, but there's so much mystery to this story and intrigue, and the way that MacDonald crafts this story creates this landscape and these characters who are so funny and have so many layers to them, and there's such great dialogue in this story that I got completely lost in it. And like I said, the way it reveals layer after layer, that when you think you understand what's going on, it will surprise you. And so I really enjoyed the journey this took me on. And yeah, it's one of these big books that you can get completely immersed in, and that I think is really unusual and special. It's sort of surprising to me that this novel hasn't taken off more than it has, because her previous novel, Fall on Your Knees, I think a lot of people did. It was that an Oprah's Book Club choice? But also, yeah, just this an author that writes in a way which is so compelling that you just want to read more. And so I feel like she's almost like Sarah Waters, but just hasn't taken off in the way that Sarah Waters has. So she's due for that kind of level of literary fame. For the nonfiction book, Papyrus by Irene Vallejo, translated by Charlotte Whittle. It does say on the cover the #1 international bestseller. So I guess this book has sold quite a lot, but again, I've just not heard that many people talking about it. And I know it has got some book prize attention, but I feel like maybe fiction readers just aren't aware of this book as much as they should be, because this is so engaging and is such a book lover's book. I'm looking at the history of physical books themselves from the very beginning in ancient times, when books were first created using papyrus leaves from a plant in Egypt to create these texts, and then following it through the ages of the development of books themselves, but also the way that books have been curated and organized and published and celebrated and lost. It's such a gripping journey, but also a really personal tale as it gets into the story of why books are so meaningful to the author herself. And there are so many tidbits of individuals that were like book lovers and history. Some of these are like famous, celebrated people who kept immense libraries. Others were like kind of oddballs that had their own personal collections. And then there are like the librarians, the people that have really celebrated and kept books going and tried to protect books when there were mass destructions of books, and during war or during censorship of different governments and in different countries, and so how it follows this story, and also how since the beginning of books there have been lists of books, and since I am somebody that likes following book prizes and lists of books, that really these lists are how books get passed on, how readers are made aware of books. And so it gets to the heart of really what this video is about, of just trying to hold up some books and say, hey, you might want to try reading this. This book is really special. And this book is, and it's told in such an engaging voice that there's some nonfiction which can feel really dry to me in just its recitation of fact. But the way this is told, it's just a pleasure to read. Speaking of books that disappear, next is a novel that almost never saw the light of day because it was written in the 1960s. The author committed suicide, and the manuscript for it lay dormant for decades and was only published for the very first time this year, and that is Love, Leda by Mark Hyatt, who was an author of the queer English bohemian scene in the 1960s. He published a number of poems, but yeah, he died quite early on, and he wrote this novel, which just lay around in a closet, but was finally found and brought out into print. And this is a story following a man named Leda, who is obviously based a lot on the author himself. He comes from a working class background. He has no fixed abode or fixed job. We follow him mostly as he journeys through London, meeting a number of different people, pining after a married man man. He has sexual relationships with men and women that are very casual and fleeting, and sometimes he falls into these melancholic states, and other times he goes off into these poetic reveries. He has a lot of catty asides, which are very funny to read about. And there is something so special about this book, because I feel like if it was written today or brought to an editor today, it would be really honed and toned down and made more palatable for the public. But I feel like there's something so organic and unpolished about this story, which is so refreshing to read about, because there are certain sentences, because he's a poet, that feel very convoluted or obscure, that could be clearer, but then there are other sentences which ring so true and have such clear, straightforward emotion to them. There is one line that felt so impactful to me, where he writes, "Sometimes I find that I am humiliated by myself, and my thoughts get out of hand, becoming absolutely evil, and immediately I am nothing." And what this says about our frame of mind sometimes, when we can get so down on ourselves and have this sense of self-perception where we feel like we're collapsing in on ourselves. And the way he expresses this through this character and through his interactions is so pointed, and but then it's also just this wonderful snapshot of a side of London that we don't often see in literature and fiction, and which has been captured in such a raw and powerful way in this book, that I just enjoyed reading it so much. And it feels like this hidden history which has been suddenly uncovered and brought to light. Memorial, 29 June, by Tine Hoeg, translated by Misha Hoekstra. This is a Danish novel which has a slightly experimental form in that it uses different forms of narrative, of a straightforward first-person narrative, but also letters and text messages between people. But also, it does an unusual thing with time and recounting the central character's journey and recollection and account of her relationships with a man and her friendship with another woman. And it's very purposeful in how it does this, because what this says about our connections and relationships to each other, how they're not always a fixed thing, but are always constantly changing, even if we don't know this other person anymore, or if we lose them due to death. So it follows a character named Asta, who is invited to a memorial service for a friend of hers who died 10 years ago, and who was a man that was very special to her in her life. And as we follow her in her current life, as she's trying to write a new book about a sculptor, and going to this memorial service and texting with a friend of hers from this bygone era of her life, we get this pieces of this relationship that she had, and the meaning of this man in her life, and the dynamic of this kind of love triangle that she was involved in. And it's so interesting how we follow her journey, and I got so emotionally involved in this book. It really struck me and made me think about my own past and relationships, and I think this is the kind of fiction, that we relate to the most, that can really strike us, and I feel like it's a book that will resonate with so many other people if they're made aware of it, and if they give it a chance. And finally, there's a novel I read at the very beginning of this year in January, and which has stuck with me so strongly, and which I keep recommending to other people that I think it's an absolute 5-star read and is so good. It's Vista Chinesa by Tatiana, Salem, Levy, translated by Alison, Entrekin, and it's a Brazilian novel, but it's based very much on the author's own interactions with a good friend of hers who experienced a situation very similar to the protagonist of this novel, who's a woman that is very successful professionally, but one day she is raped, and we follow the consequences of this and how she is trying to impart what happened to her children through a letter, describing her experience and how this trauma has stuck with her and really impacted her entire life, and how she is very much a survivor, but someone who has been so affected by this experience that it's completely changed her. And this is a representation of sexual assault unlike any that I've read in a book before, and that really struck me, made me really understand and feel this experience in a way that I've never done before, and that I feel like we can't get just reading journalistic accounts of it or watching the news and seeing statistics about incidents of sexual assaults, but getting into the experience of this in a very personal way. And it's a book that I think is really important. I don't like to say that too often about like novels, but that I feel like is so special, and that really everyone ought to read to understand this experience much better, because it creatively brings you into this in a way which is so striking. And I know it's like a hard sell, that it's really difficult subject matter, that if you just want to read for leisure, that this probably wouldn't be a book that you would pick up, but which it's a short book that is so impactful that, it's personally for me, it is really stuck with me. So again, I want to hold up this book and really recommend it to everyone. So those are the 6 books that I really want to recommend. I'd love to know if you have read any of these books, and if you feel the same way about me as I have about these books, or if you feel differently about them, if you want to discuss them with me in the comments below, I would love to do that. But also, if you have read any books this year that you feel like just haven't got the recognition that they deserve, I would love to hear about those suggestions as well. So please let me know about them. But thank you for watching. I hope you might give some of these books a try, and let me know if you do. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.